Did you know that each one of the 4 gospel accounts about Jesus' life in the New Testament gives us a specific picture of Jesus' life? Each one of them shows us a version of Jesus that God wanted us to understand so that we could see an aspect of his humanity or his ministry, so that we could understand more about who he is and what it was like when he lived among people here on earth. The first 3 accounts of Jesus' life, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are often referred to as the synoptic gospels. Now, you know the word synonym when a word is used that's like another word, they're similar. Synonym, well, the synoptic gospels all take a similar view. They recount most of the same miracles. They talk about the same places that Jesus traveled to. So they're all very similar, and that's why they're called the synoptic gospels. But they're written to different audiences. The audience that Matthew is writing to in particular is a Jewish audience, and Matthew is very careful in his 28 chapters. 24 of them contain fulfilled prophecy from the Old Testament to make sure his Jewish audience understands that Jesus, the man from Nazareth, is the fulfillment of those Old Testament promises that God gave through specific prophets about the seed of a woman who would reverse the consequences of sin and death. Matthew put his life on the line to prove that Jesus was the Messiah. Mark wrote brief, quick accounts so that Romans, Jews, whomever would understand that Jesus had come and in 3 short years had completed a ministry for everyone. Luke, the only Gentile author of any of the writings in the Bible, was writing for Gentiles, non-Jews, as well as Jews. And he made the best timelines because he was a physician and he knew how to record history very clearly. So it's through his careful documentation that we are able to establish without question the historical timeline and location of events in Jesus' life, invaluable to historians who can say for certain that the events and the places recounted in the New Testament Gospels are actual historical events and locations. And then there's the Gospel of John, unique because having been written about 3 decades after the other 3 were published and in circulation, it alone gives us Jesus' very specific claims about his identity. In the Gospel of John, we have the clearest statements from Jesus about his deity, about his claim to be God. And yet in all 4 of these gospel accounts, we see Jesus' life and ministry and its clear purpose. Jesus was born to die. Jesus' purpose in coming to this earth was to die for the sins of those who had gone their own way instead of God's way. You know, many people think that Jesus came as a good man to show us how to live. He came as an example. But Jesus never made that claim. Many people believe that he came as a good teacher or someone who was a healer to help downtrodden people. Some think that he came as a political figure, failed, but a nice guy. But Jesus never, ever gave that option. Jesus, from the very beginning, said that he came to die. One of his earliest conflicts with the Jewish leadership that opposed him continually is recounted in John chapter 2, when in the city of Jerusalem, as he was beginning his public ministry, he came into the city and he overturned the tables of the money changers and the salesmen who were gathered there on the Temple Mount, making a big mess of all the goods there that were being exchanged as people came to worship. When he was asked by these people in their fury by what authority he had done that, Jesus said, "Tear this temple down, and I will raise it up in 3 days." Now, this made no sense whatsoever, and standing there in the temple grounds, the physical grounds of the temple, it's easy to understand why they misunderstood. And they scoffed at him, saying it took Herod 46 years to build this temple. But John, the author, records that Jesus was speaking of his physical body and his death and resurrection, and that 3 years later, when the event happened, his disciples remembered this prediction of his death and his resurrection, and they knew it was true and believed in him. John is letting us know, as readers of his gospel, that from the very beginning of his public ministry, Jesus was predicting his reason for coming, his death and his resurrection. Jesus was born to die. Jesus did not ever allow himself to be thought of as just a good man, a great teacher, or someone who came simply to heal. Now, what do you think about him? Do you think he's just a great example? At the end of Jesus' life, as recorded in the book of Matthew, as he was gathered with his disciples, it tells us that in the Last Supper, as they were celebrating what was the Passover meal, as they were passing around the bread and then the wine of that Passover meal, Jesus said to them, "Take and eat, each of you. This is my body, which is broken for you." And then when they had the cup of wine, he said, "Take and drink from this cup, each one of you, for this is my blood of the new covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins." He was talking about what would happen the next day on the cross. He was talking about the promise God had made in the garden so long ago when sin had come in and separated humans from God, their creator. He was talking about the sacrifice of himself, the innocent, on behalf of the guilty. He was doing for us what we were unable to do for ourselves, pay our sin debt in order to reunite us with our Creator God. Who do you think Jesus is? Was he just a good man, or a great teacher, or maybe an example of how we're supposed to live? Or was he the Lamb of God who takes away the sin for those who believe in him?